Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Faith and Culture, our podcast, our interview time, which has become the #1 podcast on YouTube in our own minds. But the good part about that is we have some incredible guests. And the thing about today that is so special is my friend, my mentor, Mr. Tom Mercer is here with us today. So welcome, Tom. Glad you're joining us.
Brother, I'm happy to be here. If you would have wanted the ratings to be a little higher, you should have invited me sooner.
I should have. We're bringing in the closer, man, right now.
That's on you, bro. Not me.
Hey, talk to us about, we want to talk about several things today, but sometimes I don't even know where to start. There's so much to talk about. But first, maybe to let some people get to know you a little bit. People here at Skyline know you, people in the desert know you, people that know Oikos know you. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But talk about your background, coming to the Lord, and then your call into ministry, and we'll start there. And yeah.
Well, my journey with Jesus began at Dodger Stadium.
That's impossible. First and foremost,
Get that in.
you're the first one ever.
And it's not true.
Ever.
But I became a Christian as a kid. Grew up in a pastor's family. My dad led me to Christ, and my parents both led me to Christ. They're both with Jesus now, so my mom would not have been offended to hear me single out my dad. But both highly influential in my spiritual journey, obviously. He was a pastor, and so I grew up a PK. And I learned the great things about the local church. I learned some of the things that were not as great. And I think that it's just part of your journey as a leader. Sometimes the lessons you learn from good things happening are not quite as profound and impactful as the things you learn from things that aren't so good. So anyway, we can unpack that.
Well, what was it like being a pastor's kid? For all the pastor's kids out there that might be tuning in, like what was that like for your experience? Because people, they talk about good and bad. You hear people that fall off the whole thing, and others that are like, I'm really glad I was raised in that environment. What was your experience?
Yeah, it was good. It was a good experience. I didn't feel like my sonship as a PK was detrimental either to my parents or to me. I think I had a pretty normal upbringing. I think my dad, that generation of pastors, and I hope this doesn't sound critical at all because it was my reality. I never felt like I was second place. But in hindsight, I think that generation of pastors tended to lean into ministry a little more than family. I think my generation, then the pendulum kind of shifted and we tended to lean a little more into family than ministry. And so maybe 2 generations of imbalance has produced this generation of pastors, which I see far too often they lean into themselves. So my growing up, my dad was at all my games growing up. He was an athlete and a coach, and I aspired to be an athlete because I enjoy sports.
Basketball?
Basketball.
That was the one, right?
Yeah, but when you graduate from high school and go to college at 16, you're not going to compete. And so I entered high school when I was 12, and there was really not a chance. I even after, I learned the game of basketball from my father and then from others so that I could have become, who knows, I could have become a coach because I knew the game. But I just didn't have the stature, especially as a young man, to play.
What was your plan so you're in high school that young, so you go to college very young.
Yeah.
And what was your initial plan of what did you want to do with your life at that point?
I was a physical education major. I actually was aspiring to be a coach.
Okay,
And I became great friends of the head coach at Biola, then Biola College. Howard Lyon became very much a part of the spiritual next phase of my spiritual growth in college. Very godly man, great guy. He loved me. and I loved him. In fact, I started to grow a little bit my freshman year at Biola, just because I love the game, we started playing around, in the afternoons and at the gym, pickup games, and faculty were in there. And not that I made a name for myself, but I could compete finally because I grew to the incredible stature that I have now at 6 foot, and I could dunk.
Oh, yeah, some hops.
Yeah.
White man can jump.
Yes, he
Let's
can.
go.
And I did have the highest vertical jump of any white player
Yes.
at Biola then. So anyway, all that to say, I played, and Coach Lyon and I had a lot of conversations. We golfed together, and he said, "Tommy, I want you to come out for the team. I want you on my team next year." I said, "Coach, I'm not good enough to be on your team." He said, "I know." But he said, "I still want you to come out. I still want you on the team." And I think he was obviously at a Christian university. He was thinking about the locker room, thinking about the team, thinking about a lot of aspects, not necessarily, on the court. And but I declined because I had too many friends that were aspiring to make the team for the right reasons or for athletic reasons, and so I declined. But always appreciated that he loved me, and he spoke into my life for those 4 years, and I'll always be grateful to Howard Lyon at Biola.
So your journey takes you are doing what in college, like studying, not ministry at that point, but what?
For a couple of years, it was a physical education major, and then I realized that much of that was kind of like pre-med.
I thought you were doing marketing.
And I got it. Well,
that's what
okay,
that's
a good
got
thought.
to that.
No,
got to
we'll-
that.
we'll
Okay,
get
I
to that.
jumped the gun. Go ahead.
If you care to know all these details, but yeah, no, I was but when they started asking me to, or the curriculum wasn't asking, demanding that I take upper division physical education classes, anatomy and physiology, kinesiology, then I realized, this is more than coaching, and so the Lord at that point started to call me into some other things, and I changed my major to psychology. I graduated from Biola with a degree in psychology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is why I've always had great insight into your life, Jerry.
Yes, exactly. Constantly counseling.
Constantly. But yeah, I was psych major, graduated with that. And I began working at the church my dad pastored as an intern, and fell in love with the idea of youth ministry.
Yeah.
We used to call it youth ministry. Now it seems like it's more often called student ministry, but same thing. And so then I went to Talbot Seminary out of Biola to pursue ministry for about a year and a half, and that led to the marketing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember as a young pastor at High Desert Church, when I was watching your sermons, you were one of the first that I saw was so creative with PowerPoint at the time, and you utilizing the visuals in that way. And I remember talking to you about that, and I think it was something with your marketing background just clicked.
Yeah.
That was like, yeah, well, I would do these things, and
Right.
so I just remember that back in that
A psychology major has so many different avenues that you can pursue. And ministry, it was great that I have that background academically in ministry for maybe some obvious reasons. But I always enjoyed design, and this is before the digital age.
Yeah.
I would be involved with some of the men's groups and the student groups in designing some of the promotional material for their events. And so I had kind of a crisis my second year in seminary. It was a crisis of conscience relating to the local church. The local church where my dad pastored was a great group of people for a while. They were probably great. If they're still living, they're probably still great. From my vantage point, from my perspective, they were very kind to my father And then something happened, and there was some friction. And my dad was a very good teacher. He was not a very good delegator. So we had a hard time letting go of people. His teaching gift allowed a church to grow from a couple of hundred people to 600 or 700 people very quickly. But then he couldn't hand people off because he really loved people. He was the consummate shepherd of the flock.
He wanted to know everybody's name, make sure that there was a relational connection. Reminds me of Eugene Peterson, who said, I'll never pastor a church over 300 or whatever,
Yeah.
because I can't know everybody.
So connected.
Yeah.
And as a result of that inability to delegate, he would hire staff, but he had a hard time letting them do their job because he just wanted to, he wanted to maintain that connection with everyone. So it was a virtue in his heart. It was a virtue to love people, but it very much crippled the ability of the churches he led to grow beyond that solo leader pastor kind of growth barrier. He had it pretty quickly into every ministry that we had, and we had several. So we moved from town to town every 4 or 5 years. Every 4 or 5 years, he would change ministries. Yeah. And so, anyway, at this particular church, the lack of growth, it grew quickly, and then it just stopped. And nobody really knew why. My analysis of the inability to delegate is much, very much after the fact, in hindsight. He and I had a lot of conversations about that when I became a pastor. And he, of course, was willing to, see things through my lens and say, yeah, that probably had a lot to do with it. But all that to say, in this particular setting, the church grew and then it stopped growing for that reason, in my opinion. And that's when the deacon board, who operated much like an elder board might in some of our experience, they started to ask him questions, and he thought they were being a little bit unkind in the way they asked. But he ended up leaving, which was fine. Then the next guy came in, and I just have to say, it just rubbed me so wrong, the transition and the succession and the things that were said, that I told the Lord, I don't want to do this. So I quit seminary.
Wow, that influenced you that much that you were like, nope, I ain't going to be involved.
I knew my dad's heart.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that it was fair to not recognize that better.
Yeah.
And so, and it wasn't like I was defending him. I was really ticked off. So I told the Lord, I love you, Jesus. I don't like the local church anymore.
Yeah.
And so I actually dropped out of seminary finals week. Wow. I left 18 graduate units on the table. Walked away.
That's how serious that was.
I was upset.
That's how much it affected you.
And so that's when a guy in the church asked me, I just didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to work. And a guy I had done some work with in the men's group with some of their promotional stuff, evidently he recognized that was a love of mine and a skill, maybe, and that was still rather raw. And so he hired me, and I worked for him for a year. And I had a great, great time. Jim was a very kind man, Christian guy, loved the Lord, loved me. He had aspirations for me to continue with him, I think. He and I had long talks about that. But then he asked me this question. He said, because he knew the answer, he said, so after about a year, he said, so where do you go after work? And I wasn't married, I wasn't dating. And I said, well, I go to the church I now attend, and I help out with a student group. And he said, they pay for that? And I said, no. And he said, well, let me ask you a question. If they paid you to work at the church, would you come help me after work for nothing?
That's a good question.
And I still get a little emotional talking about that day because I started to tear up.
Wow.
And Jim had that look in his eye like, Tom, what are you doing here? So I told the Lord, okay, I'll return to the path that He had been preparing me to take, and I got back into ministry.
So Jim saw that calling on your life. Maybe
Either that,
before.
or he thought my marketing skills sucked, and he thought we got to offload this guy.
Hey man,
You know, in the kindest way possible.
that's got a
I don't
wonderful
know.
plan for your life. It's just not in marketing.
Yeah, Jim was, it's funny, Jeremy, because I think you've experienced this. God brings men into our life at just the right time for just the right reason. And whether it was Frank Mercer, my dad, who did such a magnificent job for me up to the age of 16, I go away to college, Howard Lyons steps in. And for about 4 years, man, I don't know, these guys are just great guys. And then Jim for that year, and then I became a youth pastor at church. And that's where
How did that transition happen? So you're upset, internally at least. You're going, gosh, I don't want to be part of the local church because of what they did to my dad.
Well, it's not that I didn't want to be part of the local church.
Maybe.
I didn't want to work for a
there.
local church.
Okay, so that
Right.
it wasn't the fact that, hey, I'm not going to be.
I still went to church.
Yeah, you're still going to church. What? Now you're volunteering at that point.
Uh-huh.
You're saying,
Yeah.
okay. Now, I mean, even that, you got some church hurt here, but I'm still called to this. Like, what was that sense of? I need to do this. Was it obligation, or was it no? God is. This is what I do. I'm volunteering here. I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, I volunteered. I think it was because I thought volunteering was what non-paid church attenders did. I guess.
Did everybody hear that? I mean, I just want to
Yeah.
make sure we got.
And so I did. I guess that sounds spiritual, but my attitude was horrible. I mean, on the one hand, I wouldn't let go of the pain or the bitterness that I was still feeling. And I was very leery of leadership, but still, I loved Jesus. Jeremy, I did. I wanted to make Him happy. It's funny. You want to make Him happy, and you want to protect yourself at the same time. And sometimes that's not possible. And that eventually turned out to be too big attention for me, I guess. But that moment with Jim locked it up, and we got back in the game. So,
Well, how quickly was that? So you had that conversation. Did you quit, Jim? The marketing right then,
not right then.
or was it more like, hey?
I gave him some time to get used to the fact that I wouldn't be. No, I'm
Jim's like, no, you go right now. It's fine, buddy. I think God's calling you.
He would have been glad with that. But I didn't want to leave him hanging, so I hung out for a while. I still could tell you, I could take you there. I couldn't tell you the name of it. It was a restaurant near Anaheim Stadium, where the Angels play, where we had lunch, and he finally said, "What are you doing here?"
Wow.
And so I still remember that very well. But once it's pretty funny. Once I decided to get back into ministry, there was a pastor in Upland, in the Inland Empire in Southern California here, and he heard that he knew my dad, and he heard that I might be a free agent, that he could hook up, and he thought that Frank's son, because my dad was a very prolific student leader before he became a senior pastor, and so he asked me to come in for an interview, and I remember calling my dad and saying, I don't know, do you think I ought to go? I don't want to work for this guy. And my dad said, you ought to go because it'd be a good experience. So at the end of the hour of interviewing, he said, when can you start? And I said, you hardly know me.
Wow.
He didn't check references. I never submitted a resume. It's weird.
Wow. So he knew your dad. You said.
He said, you're Frank's son, right? And I said, yeah.
Good stock.
Yeah. He said, you're Frank's son. I said, it depends who's asking.
Yeah.
Yes. I am. And he said, then can you start? Can you start next week?
Wow.
And I didn't know. I wasn't expecting that. So I go, well, I guess. But it turned out to be a great run. 7 years.
Wow.
And again, now Jim's out of my life, and in steps Morris Yoakum, who's the pastor.
Pastor there.
And he wasn't real strong on the stage. But man, he taught me great leadership, and anyway, so I worked for him for 7 years.
What, Jim, was he a Christian, Jim? The guy that you worked for?
Uh-huh, yeah.
So he was a believer?
Oh, yeah.
So he saw that. I mean, that was just clearly sounds like spirit moving there. Saw that in you. Okay, so you said Morris?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what was the main takeaway that you learned being a youth pastor for 7 years under Morris?
Protect your team. Yeah, I gave again, the deacon board, old Baptist structure, reasons to question my wisdom in leadership. Our youth group did a lot of fun stuff. Nothing that I ever considered inappropriate. I don't think we ever crossed the line. But there was, we pushed the envelope a little bit, and as a result, they would bring it up at their meetings. And the funny thing is, I never knew it until I left.
Oh, wow.
Morris had my back. And I knew he did while we were working, but I didn't know the nature of the concern and the depth of the concern that the board had about my leadership. So yeah, Morris, he protected his team.
Wow.
And and you know, even this idea of delegating, I delegated well, as you know. We worked together for a while. Yeah. And when we gave responsibilities, we never micromanaged, never looked over their shoulder. We hired good people and we let them lead. And Morris taught me a lot of that.
So he gave you a lot of freedom, and he trusted you.
Yes, he did.
That's a key.
And we had a great, it's where I learned the oikos principle.
Yeah.
Not from him.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he didn't cooperate with it, but
Yeah.
no, he's the one who took me to that seminar with Dr. Arnn that taught me that idea that became so transformational for everything I would do in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to getting into that
Yeah.
in a minute. You have family.
I do.
And talk about meeting Cheryl and talk about a little bit about your family.
Well, Cheryl and I have been married almost 44 years. She is the prototypical great pastor's wife. I tell you, you know, it's an assumption that any of this is interesting to anybody but me. So forgive me for my presumptuous attitude. When Cheryl, her family, was in the church that I was discussing before, that started great for several years, then turned out kind of rough, but her family was a wonderful part of that church. And when she was 7 years old, my father baptized her.
Wow.
And when she was about 12 years old, my dad, if you were here, he'd be cracking up telling you the story. He was at their home, and she was serving dinner as part of the, family meal. Mm-hmm. And my dad looked at her and said, "I wish my son were a few years old, younger, or you were a few years older."
Oh, wow.
Because she's 7, almost 8 years younger than me.
Yeah.
And when she's 12, of course, that's significant. so
You're 19 or 20.
he came home and he told me that story. Of course, I didn't give it a second thought, because the age difference and the phase of life that we were in. But all that to say, she grew up, and I was pretty enamored with her. I was very close with her family, as you can guess. Right out of high school, her family was moving to the East Coast, and they allowed her to marry me. Wow. And so she was a young bride, became a youth pastor's wife very quickly, and we've had a very blessed run. But my dad saw something early on when she was a young girl. Of course, later on, it was easy for me to see too. But he knew she would be a very special woman who had a heart for Jesus. And Cheryl, she's a great lady. I told the church when I left a couple of years ago, after 38 years as the leader at HDC, I said, "You're going to have a lot harder time replacing her than you're going to have replacing me." Yeah. And that's not a knock on anybody.
No.
She's been amazing.
Yeah, and I think about, well, you as the senior leader and what you did in influencing me, she did in influencing Janie.
Good.
That's a really,
You've got,
a great thing.
Janie's just like her.
yeah.
And she's pretty special. And together we have 3 kids, all grown. And 2 are in ministry, our daughters. One is the wife of the lead pastor at Hillside Church in Wrightwood. That's Danette. And Brian, her husband.
Yeah.
And then Lindsay, our second child, our youngest daughter, is the event director for events at High Desert Church, where we were working all those years, where she grew up. And then our son is a business leader in Phoenix.
Yeah.
And between the 3 families, we have 11 grandkids.
What a blessing.
Yeah.
What would you say as a parent was key? Because now you have 3 pastors' kids and you're raising them. And we'll get to the growth of the church, but you are raising them in a real fast growth pace of a church, which can really fry a lot of families, right? When you look at pastoral ministry and you look at pastors that don't make it, only 1 in 10 pastors actually get to retire as a pastor. And a lot of them flame out, or they have moral failures or whatever because it's just the pressure and they don't balance it well. So what was some keys for you in being able to balance that? You got a growing church, yet you got a family. You have 3 kids that you still have to, that's your first ministry.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the keys with what you did there.
Yeah, I don't know. We're making it up as we
Thank
go,
you, Cheryl.
Right? We could give you all the spiritual answers, like stay close to Jesus, but that's just it's real important. Because when you are walking with the Lord, you tend to make good decisions. Yeah. I mentioned before my dad's generation of pastors tended to lean, if you're looking at family and ministry, and you want to find that perfect balance. My father's generation kind of leaned a little more into ministry than maybe their family. Maybe they should have with their family. Mine, it was very well, it was almost expected to lean more into your family. Now, not everybody did, but I did let that pendulum kind of, go from what I experienced growing up to what I wanted to see my kids experience. So we spent a lot of time together, a lot of family trips. This, again, is before the digital age with iPads and iPhones. And when we took a vacation, we had conversations.
Yeah.
And so we put, 250,000 miles on 2 different family vans and crisscrossed the country. I think our kids have been in 43 states. And most of the national parks. Drew, our son, our only begotten son, and I saw a Major League Baseball game.
Yeah, I remember. I was at HCC when you guys were doing that.
In every ballpark.
It was inspiring to me.
Made it all the way around MLB.
Every park.
Finished up in Montreal the year before they became the Nationals, the Washington Nationals, and that was his senior year of high school when we finished the course. And so we spent a lot of time together. And the key, I think, a key, who knows what the key is, but a key is finding ways to share ministry with your kids. Mm-hmm. So they not only learn life skills, but Drew, for example, from the age of 8, he ran the tape ministry. And for your younger audience, you can Google cassette tape, and that'll explain what that generation did. But after the service, some people like our messages, and so they want to send it to a friend or take it home and listen to it again. And it's not online, so they would buy a tape.
Yeah.
Well, we had all kinds of people coming up to me saying, "Hey, Pastor," this is when the church was starting to grow. And we had plates spinning, but nobody to catch them when they fell and broke. And so people were asking, "Hey, I ordered a tape of your message like 3 weeks ago, and is there any place I can get it? Because I paid for it," and I didn't know what to tell them. So I finally went to the board and I explained the situation. I said, "Listen, tape ministry's losing money every month. Nobody wants to do it. I got an 8-year-old son who will make a little business out of it if you'll let him. They said, take it.
Wow.
They just want to get rid of it. They were tired of the complaints too.
Yeah.
So at the age of 8, Drew became and I made a deal with him. You man the table at all the services. You replicate the tapes, the old tape duplicator, and you sell them. And you make it work.
Yeah.
And you can keep 50 cents for every tape you sell. And as the church grew, kid was making bucks, man. He'd come home, honestly, with stuff to do. And I'd be shelling out $100 a week to this 8, 9, 10-year-old kid. And so that was pretty fun. And now he owns his own business in Phoenix. And he's the founder and CEO of Payground. It's a financial tech company. It's a payment platform in the healthcare space. But I keep telling him, man, it's state ministry that taught you business.
That's what's got him going.
So I'll never forget where you came from.
I think a key statement, and this just goes so well with our word of the year at Skyline Church. Every year we have a word of the year that we kind of focus on and do a series on it. This year it's wisdom.
Yeah.
This is a line you said a moment ago. I don't want us to just gloss over it. It's such an important line. You said, when you're walking with the Lord, you tend to make good decisions.
Right.
And I think that's something that we went through the wisdom series that we did in January. We talked about that exact thing. You know, that you make wise decisions when you get your advice from the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think when you look at, we learn so much more from models than we do manuals. You've been a model, like to be able to watch your life, your ministry, your family, and to be able to follow that has been so important for what's going on today in my ministry and life and what the Lord allows me to do.
Thank you.
And so I think that's important because you've always displayed that in terms of you walk closely with the Lord and you always make wise decisions. And I tell people all the time, there'll be times when we're in the room and you're not there yet, and we had the SLT and we're racking our brain and trying to figure stuff out, and you sit down and we're like, well, this is what we're dealing with, and you'd say a sentence or two, and we go, oh yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Moving on. And we just move on. We spent an hour trying to figure this out. And
I always wondered what happened when I wasn't in the room. So thank you.
And I'm just like, but that was wisdom, and that was just a reflection to me of your consistency in walking with the Lord over all those years.
Yeah.
And so
thank you, Jeremy.
it's so important, though. I just think it's a great example for our pastors that watch out there, for our
Yeah.
church family, for everybody that watches out there. So or listens. So now you're at you're a youth pastor we talked about for 7 years,
Right.
and then somebody decides to say, would you consider this role up in the high desert of Victorville, California? Talk about that time when you went from being a youth pastor and then you get this opportunity, which truly at the time was in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was not at all like it is today in the
Right.
desert. It was desert. I mean, from far as the eye could see in many ways, many directions.
And it was very, very rural.
Yeah.
Relatively small to what it is now. All right, well, we talk about mentors. We talk about men that move in and out of our lives for a season. So Morris was my mentor for my 7 years. And and it wasn't this cut and dried, but let's just visualize for a moment. Morris walks out, Jack Hamilton walks out. I get a call from Jack Hamilton. Jack Hamilton is very well known now. He's very well recognized as a wise leader. He was a friend of mine from a distance, not close. My father led him to Christ. Yeah. And as a result of that, he and I got to know each other a little bit because my dad, was pouring into Jack and still into me as a father. And so Jack and I would meet at times. He was the administrator of a Christian school in the high desert. He would ask me as a youth pastor to come up and speak during Spiritual Emphasis Week or Be Kind to God Week or whatever week he had. And so I'd go up and I'd speak. And so we became nominal friends. And then I get a call one day. He would come and see me. He was about an hour away. and he'd go to lunch with me.
Because he was up in the high desert. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
but I was in Upland.
You're down in
I was down the hill.
Down the hill.
And I thought, this guy he loves me. He wants to come and have lunch with me. And then I found out there was a baseball card shop about a block
Yeah, Jackson
About a block.
loves his baseball card.
from, so I never let him forget that. But he calls me and he says, Tom, how would you like to, well, this is exactly what he said. How would you like to sacrifice your integrity? And I said, I thought he was joking. I said, sure, what do you have in mind, Jack? And he said, I got a church up here. It comes from a more liberal, denominational group. And in fact, I remember saying, Jack, I can't do that. And he said, Tom, I don't know how this conversation is going to go or what's going to happen in the future. I will just tell you the people who attend this church are not only conservative theologically, but they're just great people. You should talk to them. So I said, okay. So I had another event at his school, or at the school he led. I spoke there, and the search committee from then High Desert Baptist Church, came to hear me speak. And I remember.
Did you know they were coming?
I did. Jack
He
told me
he
they
told
would
you,
come.
hey,
Yeah,
this is your candidate.
yeah,
kind of.
they can come
Yeah,
if
yeah.
they want.
Sure.
And so I remember speaking at their chapel or at their event, and afterwards we talked, and the chairman of the committee, a guy named Bud Gwynn, great
I
guy.
know Bud, yeah.
Great guy. He said to me, well, I enjoyed the message today, but we have 200 candidates from inside that denominational group that have applied for this position.
Wow.
So we're going to have to look at them first. And I said, that's fine.
Yeah.
My expectations were low. And that was probably in October. And then in December, I got a phone call from him. He said, this is Bud, you remember me? And I said, sure. And he said, well, we can't find anybody that knows much about the Bible in that group. And you had to know Bud, because I know that wasn't true.
Right.
But you had to know Bud. He just had a great sense of humor. He said, so we'd like to talk to you. And that was December, and I started February 1st.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was in your heart about taking that job? Was that something when you were, when they were you're candidating for it, you speak, were you thinking, I want this, I'm going after this?
Well, I had already decided I was going to become a lead pastor.
Okay.
Yeah.
You knew that calling.
Morris was very kind to me. Two years left on my 7 years. So after 5 years, he trusted me enough to have the Sunday night service. I spoke every Sunday night to the adults, and it just became clear in those 2 years that I should at least consider that.
Yeah.
And so I did, and started asking around. I had a resume, and I gave it out to different people in different groups. Didn't get much of a response until High Desert Baptist Church, and they had 3 things they wanted in a pastor. Master's degree, 10 years senior pastor experience, that's who they were looking for, and somebody from within their denomination group. So, Tom, strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. When I dropped out of seminary, Jeremy, I always intended, well, I'll just go back to seminary. Then I got that youth job, and that just took off.
Yeah.
I didn't have the opportunity at the time, so I wasn't out of that group. I had 2 years of seminary training, but never a degree. To this day, I don't have a degree, a graduate degree. And then, and I know you have how many?
16.
Yeah, if I can have one of those, you owe me.
Yeah.
Give me one of your master's degrees. And I love the fact that, you just thrive in that environment too, like you do in local church. You're prodigious. But all that to say, I should not have been hired. And when they invited me to come, I could see God's hand in it, for sure.
So they've got that little chapel for the High Desert folks. They know what we're talking about. It's still there. And you come up there. You got the job.
I did get the job.
And you're looking at the desert, and I mean, you're bringing at that point. How many in your family? Cheryl
And Danette.
And Danette.
Yeah.
How old is Danette at this point?
She may have been 18 months old.
Okay, so she didn't know whether it's nice or not.
No.
Okay, so but what is Cheryl thinking at that moment?
Well,
It's
Cheryl
all
was
new.
fine. She had some family that were living up in Apple Valley.
Oh, okay.
A grandmother
Yeah. Okay.
that she was fine. She said, "Oh, be my Grammy," which was great. We loved Grammy,
Yeah.
and so that was fine. She again, she just signs off on anything the Lord leads us to do, and so yeah, we didn't have a hard time transitioning in.
Yeah. Good.
And I just started teaching the Bible like it was true,
Mm-hmm.
which it happens
Amazing
to
how
be.
things. Yeah.
That's why I tell young pastors now, 3 things, man. Just love your wife, teach the Bible as if it's true, because it is, and stay out of the paper.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
good things happen over time.
Amen to that.
And
That's truth.
I'm a walking witness to the just being yourself and just keeping your nose clean, loving your wife, and teaching the word, bro.
That has been so foundational here. I was doing an interview yesterday, and they said, "What do you attribute, the growth and the baptisms and all this stuff?" And I said, we teach the truth of the Bible. Like we don't make it optional. Like give them the truth and let them decide if they're going to follow it or not. But as pastors, we see churches all the time now doing the opposite, teaching the opposite of the Bible and saying we're a church.
Yeah.
And so for that particular interview, it was like, that's it. I was like, just teach the truth.
Yeah.
That's
That's
it.
right.
But that's what you've always said. And that's something that I think, you hold to that. If more pastors would actually hold to that, like just teach the Bible.
Yeah.
As if it's true, like, because it is, you're going to see a lot of transformational things happen within your church. So I love that. Now, you're there, you got about 125 people, is that what I recall?
Yeah.
And now it's in the chapel. You are starting to see some growth.
Yes.
And what did you do first? Once it starts growing, you're going, okay, because you've got a background now where your dad was going to take care of everybody. I mean, you wanted to make sure, he wanted to know everybody. You've grown up in this, but you saw the negativity of that in terms of not being able to continue to grow. At this point, what are you thinking as it grows? It goes 125, it goes to 200. These are typical markers that we're looking at. It goes to 300. Now, at what point do you hire your next person? Your first, really, right? Wouldn't that be your first? Because you came on, there's no staff.
Well, when we came on, there was no secretary, there was no custodial, there was nothing. I mean, it was lonely on the campus. But we just started teaching the Bible as if it were true, which it is. And good things happened. And it grew to about 300 pretty quickly in about 9 months.
Wow, that is...
And which was pretty typical of my dad's churches that he would lead, right? So, but I learned from my father that you got to hire a gifted leader and then let him lead. So I had a short list, just friends or connections. I remember I'd have lunch with Jack Hamilton, dude, about every couple weeks at Del Taco.
Del Tacos.
State of the art for us. And we'd have lunch at Del Taco. And so I asked him if he knew any of these guys. I said, yeah, I'm thinking about hiring somebody. And do you know any of these names? And he said, well, what about me? And I said, you? Huh, I never thought you'd want to do that. And we had a conversation. The great thing about it is Linda, his wife, and Cheryl had become good friends through our infrequent interactions. And even to this day, I think Cheryl and Linda have a shopping day every so often. They still hang out as best buddies. But I said, Jack, I didn't know you'd be interested in coming on. But he was. And so he came on as an associate pastor. And Jack, he did fairly well. in his role.
Yeah, he did.
And so, yeah, we had what, 35 years? He was my XP
Wow.
for 35 years.
And that right there, I mean, I want to get to partnership and ministry in a moment, but you experienced this growth. At what point, because you had learned the oikos principle previous, but what point did you implement it as this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, like, and start teaching it within the church? Was that early on or was that later?
Yeah, it was early on to a point. The youth group that I led, where I learned the principle, attended the seminar where I learned it, that was a couple of years into those 7. And so for the last season of my student ministry, youth ministry, we were all about oikos with youth group. And the group just blew up. Mm-hmm. I mean, bro, it just, and I tell student leaders the same thing now. Mm-hmm. Kids are wired for this, as adults are, but kids have not become tainted by so many other pursuits. They're just pure relationships. Yeah. So it worked really well. The youth group outgrew the church. And since student leaders or students don't tithe, it became a problem for the church because we were top heavy in the student ministry relative to the rest of the church. But all that to say, after, I would say, a year or 2, we started to drip the idea, but we didn't, I didn't know anything about leading in church. I learned a lot of leadership acumen from all these guys in my life, but I hadn't put much of it together yet. So I was just kind of taking baby steps as a senior pastor, which is kind of funny. There were no other pastors, but I was the senior pastor for that year. And then a few years in, we started to become more intentional and a little more sophisticated in the way we deployed the idea in membership classes and in my teaching on the weekend.
So you're rapidly growing because of, you've been teaching this principle. People are inviting people. You're teaching the Word of God. And what are the incremental things that you remember growth numbers-wise? You're hitting these different markers that, if you weren't in the middle of the desert, you would have been plastered on, magazines or whatever. And what
That'd have been the worst thing that could happen to me.
But it's, it was always interesting to me as we were, growing those years too, because, I was there 7 years and it was cranking and it always overlooked.
It really took off after you left.
Yeah, I know. We got much better. You got to remove the roadblock. But yeah, no, it's just interesting to me as you look at that. You're this tiny place in the desert. It was a tiny little chapel. And you had to go into a building program to build a gym.
Yes.
Because of the growth.
Yes.
What was your number at that point? 500? When you're like, hey, we can't do this little chapel anymore.
Yeah,
we went to multiple services.
We had 3 services on Sunday, and the chapel seated 200. Yeah. And so we filled it 80% 3 times. And then we went to, we started with a Friday night service, an alternative to Sunday service. And then we switched it to Saturday. The Friday made everybody stick around for the whole weekend, and that was a little much for them, for the volunteers.
Yeah.
So anyway, we had Sunday services, Saturday service in the little chapel. We built this gym where it was 2.5 times the number of seats that the little chapel had, and then we grew that. We had 6 services in the gym.
Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah,
right?
2 Saturday, 4 Sunday.
Yeah.
And so we had 6. And then we moved into the auditorium. It's a nice auditorium.
How many services are you doing at that point? Okay, so there's 6. You did them all live.
Yes.
Right? Then how many Sundays were you averaging?
Preaching?
Preaching. So out of 52.
45.
You're doing,
Yeah, a lot.
So
Brother, I was a preaching
days.
machine.
Yeah.
And you know me, my father used to have a line, sermonettes are for Christianettes. So, and you know me, I tend to push the envelope when it comes to teaching. When I
You hear that, church?
when I teach, so it was a 40 to 45 minute every one of those services. So you multiply that 6 times on a weekend, and you know what? We would have needed to have another one if we hadn't finished that new building.
Yeah.
And I was ready for it. I was just, let me go. It will be fine.
Yeah.
But the financial resources in the high desert are relatively low to many other communities. So we had to have 6 services worth of people before we could build the next facility.
Yeah. And that was 2,000 seat facility built in 2000.
Uh-huh.
And tell us a little bit about that, because that now you open that up and it grows more and things keep growing. But you were at least able to peel back from 6 services. Now you're going to how many? 3?
Well, we started with 4, but it wasn't because we needed the space.
Yeah.
It was because we wanted to make it somewhat convenient for folks on Saturday night and Sunday morning. So we had 2 Saturday, 2 Sunday morning. And then eventually the Saturday night became, it became much easier to kind of combine them because we didn't have 2,000 people coming on Saturday night. We had, about 1,200 on a Saturday night. So we just dropped the 1 service. Yeah. And then we had the 3 for your whole time with us, because that was pretty quick after that auditorium opened up that you
2001.
and Janie came.
Yep, right away. Okay, so now let's get back to delegation.
Okay.
You've got all this stuff going on. You got a lot of people coming. You've hired. Built to Last was a big reason. You were already looking down the line at your succession plan when I got there. Like you started talking about it.
That's why we hired you.
Yeah. Well,
Do you want to go into that, Jeremy?
Maybe. It's funny because Jack, how we got up there, we're down here at Bonita as a youth pastor, and I did the same thing. I went and spoke at Spirit Christian, and Scott was there, Scott Hitzel.
Sure.
And they wanted me to come be the youth pastor up there. And I said, well, that's not what I'm going to do next. I'm going to do adult ministries. And he goes, well, I just had lunch with, Jack Hamilton. And actually, after I told him no, he went and had lunch with Jack. And Jack said, we're doing this Built to Last thing.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody for an adult ministry role? I go,
Yeah.
Just talk to this guy down in San Diego. He said no for youth. So that's how that all got started. That got that ball rolling. And but you guys had that plan, and I remember I loved the vision for that. I loved the idea that we're going to plan 20 years out, 30 years out, and then we're going to work backwards. And you had these open roles, and that's one of them that I was lucky enough, blessed enough to get there and fulfill.
Yeah.
I didn't know any kind of succession was on the horizon at all, because nobody did at that point. But it
Well,
was,
some people did,
it was,
because it was a closed conversation.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about succession, people get worried.
right.
So we had a lot of discussions internally. And I truly believe, Jeremy, that you have, it's consistent with the oikos principle. The oikos principle hands ministry to the people. And the mission is in the hands of the congregation. And this is not to be either critical or demean the import of any senior leader, any teaching pastor at any church anywhere. But if there is no succession of mission, pastors are plug and play. Mm-hmm. We're really not that big a deal. And so, now with a generation that leans into themselves, it's hard to communicate that, but it's true. So it was in 2000, we had been there 16 years, that we started to plan our exit strategy. Because we knew it was going to take a long time to get things lined up. We hired you, even as a young leader who, pretty green, if I might,
Very, very.
might say,
Yep.
but uber gifted and just such a joy to work with. And so Jeremy and Janie come to HTC, and Jack and I are talking. I'm thinking, man, this could work well timing-wise. Because, if pastors are plug and play, unplug Tom, plug in Jeremy, and the ministry continues. And if you remember, right at that time, we also started to be strategic about sharing the stage.
Yeah.
And I was not teaching 45 weekends a year.
Right.
But for the last almost 20 years, I taught like 27.
Yeah.
And you were one of the Sunday morning big church teachers. And now the present senior pastor of HTC, Todd Arnett. Yep. He was another one of our teaching team. We had several others, Tim Cool and others who've now gone on to other ministries, but very gifted young teachers. And so we shared the stage. And I think that was part of a hit by the bus philosophy.
Yeah.
Like if Tom is taken out really quickly, maybe because he's hit by a bus, or maybe because he gets sick, or maybe because who knows what, maybe because. But if Tom is here today and gone literally tomorrow, what happens to the church? Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, we need to begin to offload my responsibilities. Let these young leaders begin to take steps up in leadership, in visibility, in some of the key leadership activities. I mean, not just, give announcements.
Yeah, you
or
gave
host a service.
You gave young leaders a seat at the table. That
Yes.
was very important. Yeah.
And we wanted to, so if that happened, which we hoped it didn't, I was not looking to leave any day soon. I just knew that it was something you had to be intentional about well before you expected to walk away.
And so that's delegation, that's teamwork, that's all those things. And, because you had grown up in a different environment seeing that, and then you start implementing this, it's pretty obvious that would contribute to your longevity. That you have a team. You have a teaching team.
Yes.
What was your philosophy on somebody teaching on stage at High Desert Church? What did they have to bring to the table, for example?
They had to teach the Word of God as if it were true.
I've heard that somewhere.
Love their wife. Yeah, it was the same criteria.
Yeah.
And humility, Jeremy. Yeah. If people sought the stage, if some guy came in my office and he said, "Hey, listen, Pastor Tom, I'm your guy. Yeah. And just put me up there a little more." That would have been, then we would have had an exit plan for that guy. Yeah. We've always been blessed with great leaders, but reluctant leaders. It's almost like we would ask you guys, and, well, I guess, yeah, but, do you think that's a good idea? And, bingo, man, that's exactly what we're looking for. But that humility was so key. Humility is the feature that brings, this is not a leadership principle from Tom. This is a leadership principle from Peter, Saint Peter, the big guy. And that is to humble yourselves before God, and in due time, He'll lift you up. And the reason you're here at Skyline and have this amazing ministry, bro, is because of your humility, not because of your gifts.